The lives of celebrities can seem charmed, but even members of the A-listers world have likely suffered their share of heartbreak. While most of us have grieved the loss of someone we held dear, there's a particular tragedy in losing a loved one at the hand of someone else. Iconic comedy actor Kelsey Grammer is best known for his turn as Frasier Crane, but perhaps that brilliant sense of humor evolved out of the devastating losses he suffered in his past. Grammer's parents divorced when he was a boy, and he was just barely a teen when his father, Frank, then living with his second wife, was murdered outside of his home. Frank heard a noise outside his house and went out to take a look. When he did, he found a man, later identified as Arthur B. Niles, setting fire to his car. Niles then shot Frank twice, killing him. Niles was later apprehended, but was found not guilty by reason of insanity. 5 years later, when Grammer was 20, his 18-year-old sister Karen was abducted and murdered by serial killer Freddie Glenn. He and his two accomplices were eventually captured, and Glenn was sentenced to death, later commuted to life in prison. But the tragedy in Grammer's life didn't end there. 5 years after Karen's death, Grammer's two half-brothers, Billy and Stephen, died in a scuba accident when one failed to resurface, and the other died of an air embolism after going back down to look for it.
Do you ever get over it?
No.
The 1990s Chicago Bulls were legendary, and center stage in that franchise was Michael Jordan, one of the greatest to have ever played the game. People still talk about the amazing circumstances behind the team's rise to fame, as featured in the Netflix miniseries The Last Dance. But one part of the story doesn't get as much press. Around July 23, 1993, Michael's father, James Jordan, suddenly went missing, according to the New York Times. It wasn't until the following month that he was finally found. First, his red Lexus was discovered in North Carolina. Not long after, authorities located his body 60 miles away. The death shocked Michael and directly led to his first NBA retirement 2 months later. According to authorities, James had parked his car alongside a highway while traveling through North Carolina to take a nap. Two men, Daniel Green and Larry Demery, found him still asleep and intended to tie him up and steal the car. But a turn of events left James shot and killed. While the official story is that the incident was a carjacking gone wrong, there are numerous conspiracy theories, including that the killing was related to Michael's excessive gambling debts.
He's a voice of reason that always drove and challenged me. That's the type of father I am.
Like a friend?
Yeah, like a friend.
Actress and singer Jennifer Hudson's career was just beginning in 2008. She had just released her debut album, a huge hit despite her loss on American Idol a few years prior. And with an Oscar win for her role in Dreamgirls, she had nowhere to go but up. But on October 24, 2008, Hudson received a tremendous personal blow when her mother, Darnell Donnerson, and her brother, Jason Hudson, were found shot to death in their Chicago home, according to ThoughtCo. Her sister Julia's son, 7-year-old Julian King, was also missing and presumed kidnapped. Police found his body 3 days later. He had also been shot. Chicago police arrested Julia's estranged husband, William Balfour, for the crimes and found that he had previously threatened to kill Julia's family multiple times. Balfour was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Meanwhile, Jennifer ceased all public appearances until the following year. She and her sister Julia also started the Hudson King Foundation for the families of slain victims, a charity to support the families of those who had been murdered. Jennifer eventually returned to her career, putting out 2 more successful albums and continuing to garner awards for her performances in music and acting. But the losses remain deeply woven into her story.
It's literally just takes a part of you.
Venus and Serena Williams are household names due to their legendary talents on the court, but they also have several other siblings who aren't quite so famous. The oldest of these was the duo's half-sister, Yetunde Price, who was also raised in Los Angeles. Sadly, LA has a history of gang violence, especially in the suburb of Compton. On September 14, 2003, Price and her boyfriend, Roland Wormley, parked outside of a local drug house and caught the attention of 2 members of the Southside Crips, Robert Edward Maxfield and Aaron Michael Hammer. Maxfield fired a gun at the parked vehicle. Wormley quickly drove off, not knowing that Price had been struck in the back of the head by one of the rounds. He stopped at a nearby relative's house to call 911, but it was too late. Price was declared dead at the hospital. Initially, there were rumors that the two had stopped to buy drugs, but this was later found to be incorrect. They were innocent victims the Crips mistook for members of a rival gang.
It's not easy, but the best part of it all is we have memories.
Starting his career as a music store employee, moving up to radio DJ, and finally transforming into a rap superstar, DJ Khaled has truly worked his way up the ladder in the music industry. But on his rise to the top, Khaled and his family have encountered devastating tragedy. Just months before Khaled married his wife, Nicole Tuck, her brother Jonathan was murdered during a break-in at a Bronx apartment on February 4, 2018, according to Vibe. While initial reports claimed that the apartment was the home of a drug dealer and that Tuck had been there buying drugs, this has been called into question, with later reports saying he was just visiting to watch the Super Bowl. Regardless, during the game, a man named Richard Jimenez burst in and attempted to rob the apartment owner. Reportedly, Jimenez intended to strike Tuck with the butt of his gun, but the weapon went off by mistake, killing Tuck. A year later, Nicole Tuck later wrote a letter to the federal judge overseeing the case, asking for the harshest sentence possible, according to People. Jimenez was sentenced to 20 years in prison for the crime. Reality TV star and brief presidential assistant Omarosa is known for her shrewdness and aggressive approach to business. But long before her reality TV savvy would make her a household name, Omarosa would have to navigate a different type of territory. Her father, Jack, was murdered in 1981 when Omarosa was only 7. While exact details haven't been made public, 40 years later, Omarosa has spoken about her father's death and its deep impact on her life, crediting the early trauma with her own personal growth in spite of the hardship. But tragedy would hit her family again decades later. In 2011, her brother, Jack, who was named after their father, was murdered as he slept, according to Radar Online. He had recently begun dating a woman and was staying with her when the two were attacked by her ex-boyfriend, Marco Cardenas, who shot and killed Jack. The woman survived the ordeal, and Cardenas was later sentenced to 21 years to life in prison. Even before she became a superstar in the film and television industries, Sofia Vergara was already doing well for herself, having been raised in a wealthy family in her native Colombia, according to 9 News. The family was so well off that her older brother, Rafael, kept bodyguards around him at all times, since his position in the family made him a constant target. But this ended up directly leading to tragedy. In 1998, before Sofia immigrated to the U.S., Rafael went without his bodyguards for just 1 day. It was then that kidnappers tried to abduct him. It's not clear exactly what happened, but when the attempt failed, one of the would-be kidnappers shot and killed Rafael.
None of us was able to say goodbye.
As a direct result of the tragedy, Sofia moved some of her family members to Miami with her to start a new life. One of the most influential guitarists of the past 30 years has been Dave Navarro, one of the founding members of Jane's Addiction. But back in 1983, just a few years before Jane's Addiction made Navarro world famous, his mother, Connie Navarro, was murdered at her home alongside her friend Sue Jory, according to the New York Times. Dave was only 15 at the time and has gone on record saying that he believes he would have been killed that night too, if not for a last-minute scheduling move which led to him staying at his father's house. Connie and Sue's murderer went free for nearly a decade until the story was featured on America's Most Wanted in 1991. A viewer tip led police to arrest John Riccardi, Connie Navarro's ex-boyfriend. He was subsequently convicted and sentenced to death, later changed to life without parole.
It just was the darkest, most horrible moment of my life.
Navarro made a documentary about the murder in 2015 called Morning Sun, which includes an off-camera visit to Riccardi in prison. Navarro described the meeting as awkward and said of Riccardi, "He's just some old dude dying in jail." Charlize Theron has cemented herself as a bona fide action star. In addition to winning Oscars for her dramatic performances, and critical acclaim for her comedy roles. But as a young girl growing up in South Africa, Charlize and her mother, Gerda, were terrorized by her alcoholic father, Charlize Theron.
It feels like people want that to be the thing that defines me. I won't let something like that define me.
While Charlize and Gerda had experienced violence from Charles in the past, it was June 21st, 1991 that would be the breaking point. Charles drunkenly threatened his family and even fired shots at Charlize and Gerda, missing both of them. In fear, Gerda fled into another room and retrieved another handgun, and she then returned fire at Charles, killing him. When South African authorities investigated the shooting, they declared Charles' killing to be a justifiable use of self-defense. No charges were ever filed against Gerda. Charlize, only 15 at the time, began telling people that her father died in a car accident so she didn't have to tell them the real story. But in more recent years, she's opened up about it, telling Today, "I'm not ashamed to talk about it because I do think that the more we talk about these things, the more we realize we are not alone in any of it." Ice Cube is either a rapper/actor or an actor/rapper, depending on who you ask. But no matter what, he's quite popular in both fields. But back in 1981, Cube was only 12 years old, and his half-sister, Beverly Jean Brown, was 10 years older. She had married Carl Clifford Brown, whom Ice Cube has described as a wannabe cop who couldn't cope with the rejection from the LAPD. He became abusive to Beverly, and on June 29, 1981, things reached a boiling point. According to the book Original Gangstas, Carl took Beverly hostage in their home. LAPD officers surrounded the property, but were unable to get inside before Carl shot and killed Beverly. It seems Carl planned on a murder-suicide, but only managed to injure himself. He died less than a month later. Ice Cube has talked openly about how the incident affected his views on gun violence, once telling HuffPost, "America is built on the gun. America is in love with the gun. It's a sick love affair, but it's just hard to break." Fight Club author Chuck Palahniuk isn't shy about grisly stories. The author himself has credited a traumatic incident in his own life for inspiring at least some of his work: the 1999 murder of his father, Fred. Not long before the release of the film adaptation of Fight Club, Fred and his girlfriend Donna Fontaine were killed by Fontaine's ex-husband, according to the Moscow Pullman Daily News. But sadly, this wasn't the first time the family had grieved this type of loss. Early in his life, Chuck was told that his grandparents died from diphtheria, but when he turned 18, his father told him the chilling truth. When Fred was 3 years old, he had hidden himself under a bed while his own father murdered his mother and then went looking through the house for young Fred. When he was unable to find Fred, he turned the gun on himself. Chuck continues to mine these deeply dark memories for the work he creates, even decades later.
It's finding that metaphor that allows you to kind of share your grief in this overblown way and to really exhaust it.
If you or someone you know is dealing with domestic abuse, you can call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. You can also find more information, resources, and support at their website.